everyone, welcome. We're going to give everyone a few minutes just to join, and then we're going to jump in. We got a really fun webinar for you guys today. Pretty excited about it. So if you're joining us, please feel free to message us in the chat, both throughout the conversation. But for now, you can also message us and let us know where you're coming from, a little bit about your portfolio. We'd love to know who's joining us today. I'll start it. Spokane. All right. Hey, Daniel. It's what time is it for you? Like the middle of the night? I was gonna say, normally when I meet with people in Australia and New Zealand, it's I meet with them at like 4 my time. Hey Nick, good to see you. Welcome, people from all over. Twin Falls, Idaho. Awesome. Hey Ben, good to see you again. Awesome. Really cool. We'll give it like one more minute and then we'll get started here. But welcome everyone. Glad to see everyone from all over joining us. Good question, Gail. We will be recording this webinar and we'll be posting it, and the recording will be available from both Escapia and Wheelhouse. Hey, Donna. Okay. So why don't we get started here? Really excited to be doing this webinar with you all today. We're doing revenue management on the regular, which is going to be kind of a great conversation about some revenue management processes and strategies that you can utilize. We know we're going in kind of an interesting year this year after multiple years of interesting years. So hopefully this will help you kind of, up your game and give you a lot of confidence and some ideas about how to approach pricing and demand as we get into the season. Really excited to do this webinar with Escapia. So it's a Wheelhouse Escapia partnership webinar, so it should be a lot of fun. And if you don't know me, my name is John deRoulet. Let's see here. There we go. I'm the head of revenue management education at Wheelhouse. Many of you, as you can tell from the chat, have talked to me. If you haven't talked to me, I'm really looking forward to an opportunity to speak. I've been with Wheelhouse about 4 years, and we do revenue management and dynamic pricing technology. So if you're looking for that extra edge, and we'd love to talk to you further. Escapia team, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Garrett. I'm going to start off as our Escapia presenter. I'm on the marketing team, helping out with sales and really providing a lot of information surrounding our features. So I'm really excited to be taking part in this revenue management discussion. Vera?
Hi, I'm Vera. I'm Vera. I'm the partnerships manager here on the Escapia side, and I help manage all our API integrated partners like Wheelhouse. And I'm with the overall EG brands for a little over 12 years.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Matt. I'm a sales engineer with Escapia. Basically, any technical stuff that we need to drill down to, that's where I'm going to come in. I've been here for about 10 years now working with Escapia, so know the software pretty well.
Awesome. So really great panel, really excited to speak. And what we're going to talk about today is first we're going to talk about some tools and opportunities you can use in the Escapia platform and via the integration. Then we're going to dive into some revenue management processes. So a lot of these things are things that you can do in Wheelhouse, but we're really going to focus more on the process and help you have some things where whether you have, 5 minutes a week or a full-time person doing revenue management, there are things that you can kind of pick and choose to implement to kind of up your game and really capture as much demand as you can. So it should be pretty fun. And Garrett, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, so before John gets into some of these really exciting revenue management strategies, I want to tell you about what Escapia can help you with when it comes to optimizing and testing with your revenue strategy. Escapia is equipped with a lot of options that can help you maximize your revenue and bookings. Our revenue strategy can cover things like length of stay discounts, coupons, seasonality offers, and more. We also use Verbo data for our industry-setting market rates tool, which is a dynamic pricing option for testing and optimization opportunities. But we also have a lot of features beyond just revenue strategy tools. Even beyond the functions of rates, Escapia's features can support your business. When analyzing the performance of your rate adjustments, you can use the new Flex Reporting tool to get deep dives into analytics and measurements for your business and clear and actionable insights. Our owners portal then allows you to disseminate that to the owners whose homes you manage, reducing back and forth on performance insights and showing the expertise your business can bring to them. Finally, you can get insights on how your revenue strategy is improving at a glance with our performance dashboard that can help you adapt your successes. There are many other tools that we offer as well, just past revenue, including things like our battle-tested trust accounting tool, guest communications, and more. So do consider scheduling a demo or asking anything to our talented Escapia panelists today. I'll go ahead and hand it back over to John so we can cover some new exciting strategies for things like inventory.
Awesome. Thank you, Garrett. And just so you know, guys, we are all kind of watching the chat, so feel free to ask questions. We'll definitely consider them either during the presentation or at the end, but really would appreciate your guys' input and participation. Happy to have that. So let's get into some strategies. And this first one I'm going to talk to you about. So just to give you a little bit of a step back, I'm going to give you two kind of processes and strategies that are fairly rudimentary, but they're great things to kind of implement and be really intentional about. And then I'm going to jump into a few more that are much more advanced. So there should be a little bit for everyone here, whether you're a full-time revenue manager or you're someone who is a great hospitality operations entrepreneur, but you need a little, you want to do some things on the revenue management side. Just so you know, I have been a revenue manager for over a decade, particularly in this space, so a lot of experience. And these are processes that I've used with my teams when I was on the property management side. So this first one we're going to cover is expiring inventory. And this is one of those kind of rudimentary ones. It's something that I think a lot of you guys are probably already doing, but especially from a kind of an intuitive level if you're an entrepreneur. But I really would propose that you make this a very specific process during your week. And what expiring inventory is really looking forward into your last minute booking window. And what you define as your last minute booking window is going to be a little bit variable. It really depends on your product. It depends on your risk tolerance. Kind of a rule of thumb is a lot of people consider it to be either 1 week, 2 weeks, or 30 days. And it's fine to use a heuristic for that because it's when you would kind of like panic about any vacancy on your calendar. And the idea behind it is in that window, you just want to position those available nights to be able to sell as much occupancy as possible because, as you know, this is a product which expires. Once the date passes, we cannot sell it. And you want to try to, that's just lost revenue. So any revenue you can get within that high risk window is going to be a benefit to you. Now, this is obviously rudimentary because people intuitively think about, I just need to drive last minute bookings. But the way you make it a process is you really set aside time once a week to do it. And you spend a little time thinking about when you're going to be concerned. And at first, starting with that heuristic, maybe it's 1 week in advance, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 30 days. That's fine. And building the habit of I'm always going to look at my tape chart, I'm always going to look at my calendar, and I'm going to make active adjustments to try to drive that occupancy is a great practice to have. As you get more advanced in doing this, you can start to bring more data into when you make that decision. And some examples of that would be if you have different kinds of inventory, so like you have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and a couple 10 bedrooms, you may decide a different time frame as last minute discount. Maybe for those 1 bedrooms, you're really just making big changes a week out to try to drive occupancy over ADR. But for your 10 bedrooms, that might be as far as 60 days or even 90 days, because if you're in that window, it's going to be really hard for you to sell. So even though this is something that's very simple and very intuitive, there is an opportunity to really make it specific to your portfolio, really make it specific to the seasonality. Another example would be maybe in high season, you really only want to do those cuts in the very short term because demand stays high all the way up until the date comes up. But in low season, you may push that out way farther. Say, hey, I want to get these bookings early, so I'm going to kind of treat the last minute inventory that's going to expire as being, as far as 30 or 45 days out. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when you're doing an expiring inventory process is I always try to remind people that you are prioritizing occupancy over ADR. I see a lot of people who do a process like expiring inventory, but they actually spend the majority of their time for revenue management doing this. And there's not a ton of payoff trying to guess the exact correct ADR. At the end of the day, the occupancy is going to be worth much more. And if you have limited revenue management time, your time is probably better spent on some of these other processes. So I try to remind people, like, figure out what your risk tolerance is. That might be your minimums, kind of what you just be willing to take, and make bigger kind of sweeping changes for expiring inventory rather than really, really struggling to be really individual on the rate. The goal here is just to get occupancy on the books. It's to get heads in beds, because at the end of the day, the increase from vacancy to any rate is much higher than trying to guess that band of the correct rate. So when we look at this as a process, I recommend that you do it every week. You pull up the tape chart or pull up whatever your tool is, put in some changes, but don't spend a lot of time doing it, right? Make it something that's more formulaic. So if you know that I'm going to cut a week out every week and you're going to drop the rate 40% so that it just hits a minimum, just go ahead and do that. Maybe do a little fine tuning on really specific properties, but just make it a process you do and move on. Any questions on that so far? Okay, I'll keep going. So this here is just an example of, this is a great process to do also because you don't really need a tool to do it. Now, obviously, if you're using a tool like Wheelhouse, we have a really awesome interfaces for you to be able to do this quickly, make these changes fast, see a lot of data. But at the end of the day, all you really need to do is go to your tape chart, look for properties that have a lot of availability, and adjust the rate. If you're using rate rules, you might build those rules into a system so that they automatically do it. You may also just do them in bulk. And ideally, if you have a way to adjust a rule or a rate in bulk, that's going to be the best use of your time. But it's really just as simple as that. Identify your availability, identify how far out you have risk, and make these adjustments and move on. The next one that we're going to talk about is another kind of rudimentary one. This one I like to bring up because people will often say they don't do any revenue management, or they're not a revenue manager, but this is a process that most entrepreneurs and business people are doing kind of intuitively, and it's a new booking analysis. So the new booking analysis is basically reviewing your new reservations. I know it sounds like rocket science, right? You're probably like, John, you're really giving me the advanced stuff here. Don't worry, I'll get into that. I'll blow your mind. But for right now, new booking analysis is a great strategy and something to really, truly, again, consider as revenue management. A lot of people don't think of themselves as doing revenue management things, but you are doing them intuitively. And as you scale, you need to take those intuitive processes and make them a process that other people could learn from or do. And the new booking analysis is one of them. I bet most of you pull up your reservations every day and take a look at them and make some judgments. And that's the core of what this process is. You want to review your new reservations, but specifically you're doing it to spot check a few data points. Those data points are going to be what dates are booking, do the rates look right, and is the count of the reservations either staying inconsistent, increasing, or decreasing. So from a revenue management perspective, that's where's my state on revenue occurring? Is my ADR optimized? And is my pace good? And you can glean a lot of that without super advanced tools from just a reservation list. At the end of the day, this is a process that I would recommend you do every day. Always pull up your list of bookings, and don't just pull up the bookings that occurred in the last day. I would pull up like the last week, even though you may be focusing on the recent few days, but you do want to give yourself a little bit more vision so that you can kind of build a perception of what's going on. And again, this is another process that you really don't need to spend a lot of time on. This is not an advanced revenue management process. You can learn a lot. You can get an idea of where you're going to look. But at the end of the day, it's something that you're just going to spot check and gut check. You're going to use your intuition to see if something seems off, and it kind of points you towards maybe doing a deeper dive in another part of your portfolio. New booking analysis is another great one because you don't need a tool to do it. Escapia has some great data tools that I know of, and you can pull a lot of this information up, whether you're using Wheelhouse or whether you're straight out of your PMS. But the goal here is to pull that reservation list, sort it by the date that it's booked. And again, I'll reiterate, you don't want to just pull the last day's bookings. You really want to pull a much broader period. So you can do things like count how many reservations you're making each day and see if that number is fluctuating a lot. See if it's increasing, if it's decreasing, and you can kind of decide if that's good or bad. The other thing you want to spot check here is when you look at individual reservations, you want to check what property they're coming in at, and you want to check the dates. Because we all know, like, we all have an intuitive idea of the booking window. If we're like, hey, it's January, I should be making bookings for spring, you want to see those bookings on the list. If you're looking at your list and you're like, well, I'm not making any bookings for March, which I think should be a high period, that's an indicator to you that maybe something is off, right? So check your assumptions about what should be going on with what you actually see in the data. Where are these bookings landing in their check-in and check-out dates? The final piece is just gut check the rate. Everyone I talk to, whether they're a revenue manager or an operations person or a CEO or entrepreneur, has an idea of what their properties are worth, and it's just a great opportunity to make sure that what you're putting out there, we know that takes a lot of work to put rates out there, that's in line with what your expectations are. And so when you're looking at the total rent or the ADR, you're just spot checking that against what season that booking is landing in and saying, okay, well, that sounds about right. I expect to be in the 400 range for dates like this. I expect to be in the 600 range. I understand that this booking here, even though it looks really low, it's coming in the next 3 days. So I'm okay with that. As you see discrepancies, those are opportunities for you to go do a deeper dive or schedule some more time to do some revenue management for it. Kind of final thing too is I always am on the lookout for check-in, check-out dates on either events, holidays, or major high season timeframes. You always want to pay attention to those. If you're in the window, you're looking to see that you have them and the rates look right to you. If you're not in the window, you just want to check them, right? The same thing is true where if you see lots of reservations that occur on the same date, but that date isn't on your radar, it's an opportunity for you to put those dates on your radar. Pull this up, spend 5 to 10 minutes looking at it every day. You've got a pretty solid revenue management process where you're going to be in touch with what's going on. Any questions so far, guys? Escapia team? Any thoughts? You're like, wow, John, rocket scientist. Thanks. Okay. So this next one is where we start to get into some more advanced revenue management techniques. And these are a form of analysis that really do take some business intelligence tools for you to do. Garrett, as you're kind of watching me go through this, maybe you can let us know what in Escapia might be available. I do know that Escapia has some really good visualization tools and data tools for especially compared to other PMSs, which is great. Obviously, in Wheelhouse, we provide a number of these tools as well, but these are a little harder to create on your own. I do have a slide here where I do show you how, but honestly, technology is in a great place where you can get access to these. And the idea here is pacing analysis is how revenue managers are really going to make decisions to optimize specific days. And there's a few keys. Basically, we're looking at our bookings, but instead of focusing on how much you're selling in a given week, you really want to map out where those reservations are landing. And if you have a good pacing visualization or data platform, you can ideally see both. You see how much you're selling and how much and where those reservations are staying. The key here about the state on revenue that's important is I talk to many people who are early in their revenue management journey, and they do a lot of pacing analysis, but they do it from the sales perspective. And the difficulty with the sales perspective is you may have week to week, you may have really good sales or similar sales, but because you don't know where those reservations are landing, if week one you made a lot of reservations for the next 30 days, that's really great. But in week two, maybe you sold the same amount, so your pace is the same, but all of those reservations came in for 6 months in advance, and you actually have a lot of vacancy that's about to expiring. So as you can see, these kind of tie together. So a pacing analysis that's based on state on allows you to see what dates are really picking up, and if you have vacancy coming up that should be a worry to you, or if you're selling too fast in another spot, really key element there. Another thing about pacing analysis is why this is an advanced technique is it does require you to have a little bit larger portfolio. Generally, in a pacing analysis, you are aggregating data together. So rather than looking at an individual unit's rate plan, you're looking at the sales across a group of units so that you can try to identify if specific dates rather than specific units can be optimized. So that's where an opportunity where like you might see sales in some of your 2 or 3 bedrooms on a date and some of your 1 bedrooms, and you're saying to yourself, well, maybe I can make more money on the ones that I still have left because the consumer is telling me that this date is valuable, right? So very cool. The other thing too is as you get a little bit more advanced here, there's a lot of ways for you to compare other kinds of data to this. So we'll kind of talk about how you can compare to your historicals. So I don't know if people use key data or are using the tools in Escapia to see like where you were last year and how you compare where you were at the same time last year. Those comparisons will give you further context into decisions you're going to make, right? This is really important because when you do have a large portfolio, you generally don't have the time to go into every unit. And even if you do have time to go into every unit, it's very hard to make decisions when you're looking at everything in a vacuum. And so this allows you to see a bigger picture and make decisions that are much more efficient. It also allows you to target specific dates and really get to the lowest level, like the deepest level of optimization possible. If you have the tools to do this, I would recommend you generally do this once a week. Some people that I talk to do this multiple times a week, where they will like kind of follow up every 3 days. It really depends on how big the portfolio is, how often you need to do this, what your kind of sales production is. But generally speaking, once a week is a good rule of thumb. And this is going to be a longer, more in-depth process. It's something that you really want to block out an hour to 2 hours to do. So let's take a look at what this looks like, because I know I said a lot of words, but being that it's complex, we probably need some visualizations. So what I have here is a example of a visualization of this kind of pacing, and this is at the monthly level. And I think many of you will have access to some of this data at the monthly level. And what I have here on the bottom is for each month, I'm using the occupancy. So you can pace off of revenue, you can pace off of occupancy, you can pace off of room nights. I generally recommend you do occupancy. Revenue, a lot of people early on like to look at revenue because revenue is what you're bringing to the bank, but it's hard to tell what your actual performance is from revenue in terms of because your properties are priced differently, right? And the seasons have different prices. So when you're looking at revenue, you might go, oh, June is pacing really well compared to January. But it might actually be that you're doing really well in January because everyone's rates are low and you have a few nights that are sold at a really high rate, but you're actually behind in occupancy. So occupancy is kind of an equalizer because whether or not the rates are the same or it has a different numbers of bedroom counts, there's the same number of days in every month. So in this situation, I have one bar that's showing me what my occupancy is for each month currently. A lot of us can get to that data. Highlighted in this kind of darker view is the highlight of the occupancy I've put on the books in the last 7 days. So right there alone, you have the idea of where you are currently and also what the change is. And that right there is a really big part of the pacing. You'll also notice I have a second bar in these examples, and that second bar would be like a comparison. So in this case, I would probably put that same data for where I was at this time last year, what my historicals were. And immediately I have some context. I know if I'm looking at this September date that This year, I have a higher occupancy on the book so far, and I'm selling about the same amount per week because those highlighted parts are about the same size. That's giving me a lot of insight into what I want to do for September. And if I'm going to make changes, now I'm making very targeted changes. I would make changes for September only rather than changing my whole year based on something that's just going on in a specific part of the calendar. When you have a pacing system like this, really the goal is to identify areas where you're pacing either ahead or behind of your whatever you're comparing to. You're also looking for areas where your sales are either much higher or much lower than they were at a similar time. If you're not using historical data, you can also use market data, which is a good substitute as well. Where's the market occupancy and how much are they selling? And that's basically identifying the spots that you're going to do a deeper dive or that you might consider making changes for. Another thing you can use if you have a good visualization here is many people are going to focus like right now in their primary booking window because that's where you have historical data. But if you have a good visualization, you can also see if things are happening further out. I do notice a lot of early revenue managers or people who don't have a lot of revenue management resources, they get really stuck on the last minute window, that expiring inventory window, and that's really all they focus on, and they kind of lose sight of everything else. When you are doing a pacing analysis that's stayed on, it gives you an opportunity to really catch if something is happening outside of your attention. So if suddenly, maybe a concert or a conference got announced 6 or 8 months in advance, rather than missing that, you'd be able to see that there are sales occurring, that those sales didn't necessarily occur at the same time last year, and you can just kind of bookmark in your head, I need to look at that or at least put it on my radar. All right. Any questions? And just so you guys know, this slideshow will be available too. So I'm not just reading off the slides, but I did want to make sure there's enough information here so that if you're looking at it on your own, it's valuable. Now, this is the monthly level. And monthly level is great. I would highly advise if you have access to that to do that. Garrett, do you guys have some tools that might kind of fit from a data perspective for folks?
Yeah, we sure do, Matt. I see you've come off of mute, and he's our product expert, so I'd love to let him chat with you about it.
We do. We have a handful of reports within Escapia that can handle this kind of stuff. Namely, if you're looking around for them, there is the YOY, so year over year unit report. That's going to give you a lot of the pacing. You can break that down anywhere from monthly, weekly to daily. So you can really fine tune those numbers that way. Also, you can take a look at our new Flex reporting tool. It's going to have a list of all your reservations in there, and you can export that, change fields around, take a look at the columns you want, and see that stuff very easily.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you guys have some great data visualizations and tools. So, kind of cobbling together what you can here to get to a good process is going to be really key. Just remember, you want to know your state on for your future dates, whether that's monthly, weekly, daily level. You want to know your sales change in a certain amount of time if you can, ideally. And if you're really lucky, you have some kind of comparison, whether that's the year over year, like Matt said, or your market data or things like that. Now let's do a little deeper dive here because I do have an example of what a daily level version of this looks like. And you all are probably looking at this chart and you're like, there's way too much here. But let me assure you that even though this looks complicated now, this is also an activity that takes a little bit of practice. But once you have gotten used to looking at charts or data tables that show this kind of pacing, you'll find that you can really assess a large amount of data at once. And so this is partly why it's advanced. It does take a little bit of investment to learn how to do it, but humans are really, really good at identifying shapes. And essentially what we're looking at here when we're looking at a daily level pacing is we're looking at a visualization of the entire tape chart for an entire group of properties. So a lot of information with the new reservations highlighted. So if you think about it that way, that's what we're looking at here. So each one of these bars is a day. And again, it's showing me what my occupancy level is on that day. I have highlighted the sales that have come in the last week. And then in green, I have that same data for the same time last year. So to give you an example, while this might look messy without having the context, I'll point out a few spots that would be really easy to spot if you just start looking at this data. So if we look in the short-term window, so this, this picture is from September, so it's like roughly September 1st through September 15th here in purple. You can see that we know that that window is coming up. That's inventory that's about to expire. Almost nothing in purple is highlighted, which means I haven't sold anything new in the last week. So that right there tells me it's a problem. This inventory is about to expire. I haven't sold anything. Furthermore, when I look at last year, I had a much higher occupancy on the books at the same time. So right there, just at a glance, I know, hey, my short-term window is really struggling. I need to go make adjustments because I want to try to fill that up. Otherwise, I'm going to have a shortfall this year. Let's go a little further. If we look at this blue period, we can kind of see the opposite. So you can see that all the purple lines are much higher than the green lines. That means I'm pacing ahead of last year. I'm using the green line as last year, but you could also imagine that as the market. And so that already is a good thing, right? It's like, okay, I'm doing really well. I'm really beating the market on occupancy here. We can also see that the highlighted bars are much bigger. So I'm not only at a higher point already, but I'm also selling a ton more. So I'm producing a lot more. This is indicating to me that this is something I maybe want to look at. One, I could just be beating the market. I can make a decision. Maybe I just want to continue because I really want to try to beat them out. I want to put stuff on the books early. Another option would be, hey, I'm selling a lot currently. I'm higher than last year. Maybe I can push the rate. So I'm going to go look for opportunities to really increase my revenue potential over these dates. You might look at go to the market and be like, well, why is the market, what is the market doing now? The goal here is this is an identification tool, but at a glance, I know I've got a problem here in the early part of the calendar. I have a really big opportunity in October, and it's telling me where the needle in the haystack is so I can go make decisions about where I want to position my rate. Another kind of small one would be like that green one, which is much further out, where you can just see, hey, I'm stacking on reservations. I'm selling quite a bit. I really didn't have anything on the books last year. And so for a lot of folks, you may not have the bandwidth to really pay attention to more than 60 or 30 days out when you're looking listing by listing. With a tool like this, you get to see the entire calendar all the time. Okay. Next kind of piece here is that pacing analysis is the identification portion, but then you actually want to go operationalize some of your changes. And here's a few tips. You may be able to do this using data tools in Escapia. If you're using Wheelhouse's tape chart, we have a lot of them directly available on the tape chart. But the goal here is when you've identified time periods that have opportunities, you want to go adjust the rates or the restrictions, right? So you're going to go in, you're going to up the rate or drop the rate, you're going to change the minimum length of stay, that kind of thing. If you have the ability to pull data about performance, that's kind of like going one step deeper, where if I go back a slide, oops, I go back a slide and we're looking at this late September, early October period where things are really good. I know that I'm going to go bump the rate up 10 to 15% and see if I can really push the rate. I could go to my tape chart or go to my rate rules and go and just increase that rate. But if I have data on the recent performance of the listings, I can kind of fine tune that. I can say, okay, well, I'm planning overall to bump the rate because that that group of properties is doing really well. But maybe within that group of properties, you have some properties that actually aren't doing well. And so if you can sort your listings by how well they've been doing, what their occupancy has been in the recent past or over the last year, you can then fine tune that. And instead of adjusting the whole grouping and say, okay, well, I'm going to adjust like all these listings, but these 5 listings that haven't made any reservations in the last week, or that had low occupancy over the last 30 or 60 days, I'm going to leave them out or maybe even drop their rate a little bit, even though the whole group is doing well. So when you have a analysis tool where you can kind of do this, you can go even deeper. First step is just make these kind of big changes and optimize the date. But keep in mind, if you pull some additional data, you can also optimize the individual units within the date, but you don't have to go unit by unit to do it. Perfect. Any questions so far or comments?
I want to add, just one of the things that Escapia can really help you with when it comes to doing these kinds of rates management adjustments is our rates manager tool is really robust. We have a lot of even just simple quality of life features that can make this easier. We could do click and drag changes, batch changes. You can do unit code searches, things that'll help you fine tune or change in bulk and make these optimizations easier to keep track of.
Yeah. And I think from a reporting perspective for you guys too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have good reports that show kind of like how a listing's performed overall. And that's always a good thing to run and just keep in mind, or maybe mark or make a note of, so that when you're making these changes, you can reference that and say, oh, well, I do know listing A, B, and C, they're on my my naughty list. And so I'm not going to include them in any rate raises. And if I drop the rate, I'm going to drop it a little more. Awesome. So this next one is another advanced kind of revenue management process, and I'm going to refer to it as bottoms up revenue management. And it actually ties really well into what we just talked about. This term bottom up revenue management is a term coined by Ben Coleman's Revenue Research. If you're aware of his revenue management team, he's really good at coming up with funny names for stuff. So I like to use it. But the idea of bottom-up revenue management is kind of like the opposite of the pacing. So the pacing is a way to do a lot of revenue management in bulk. You're really optimizing the days on the calendar rather than the individual listings. And as a revenue manager, that's going to be great because you can make a lot of progress in a really efficient way. However, you still want to cross-section that with giving individual attention to the listings. And that's where a bottom-up process is going to be really helpful. The goal here is you want to look at the holistic rate and revenue situation of a listing and decide to make changes to the overall rate plan. So in pacing analysis, where we're making optimizations on the date, we're looking at the whole listing, its kind of position in the market, the overall strategy of how you're positioning the rate, and the kind of decision making you're doing from a strategic level. And the reason why we call it bottom up revenue management is very rarely does a revenue manager have time to go look at every single listing every week. So a great way to implement this as a process is to sort your listings according to their performance. Maybe that's your last quarter's performance, the performance over the last year. You could also look at future performance, and you're trying to find your lowest performers. And the idea behind it is if you can take your lowest performers and move them up in performance, over the course of the year, you'll kind of hit all of your listings and generally move your listings up in overall performance, because you're always going to try to do the bottom. You're always going to try to hit what would be the lowest hanging fruit, improve their performance, get them out of that list. And it gives you an opportunity where the most difficult kind of analysis you're going to do, the one that takes the least amount of scale, you do it for the stuff that needs it the most and get them out of that tier. So what you're going to do here is you want to pull some reports or use some data tools where you can basically sort your listings according to their performance. It's kind of up to you to decide what you determine their performance is. You could do occupancy if you're in a really high occupancy market. You could do revenue. I would just remind you, if you do revenue comparisons, you do need to segment your properties into their groups, because obviously all of your one bedrooms are going to be the lowest performers if you have 1, 2, 5, 6 bedroom properties, and you'll never touch your 6 bedrooms, even though you might technically have some low performers there. So if you do use revenue or ADR, you need to fine tune the groups that you're comparing to. And basically from this, generate a list of the bottom 3, 5, or even 10 properties at any given time. And then on a weekly or monthly basis, go into those properties, pull them up, and look at the entirety of the rate plan. The goal here is, if they're overperform or underperforming over time, there's probably something systemic, and you want to kind of build a checklist. You want to say, is my rate plan, does it make sense? Does it make sense to the market? Does it make sense to my historicals? Am I trying something that isn't working? Do I need to adjust its overall rate position? Do the same thing with minimum length of stays. Maybe you have properties that are starting to overperform, and you're basically just reviewing these, and you realize like, oh, well, the owner said I had to do Saturday to Saturday, but none of my other properties require that, and this one's an underperformer. Maybe that's the reason why, and I need to make a change to that. I do understand some of you guys can't change all this stuff immediately without permission from the owners in some cases. And so like the analysis one, the pacing analysis, this is an identification tool. So the goal is to figure out what could be the problem. Now, if you do have full control, maybe it's as easy as like, well, I'm just going to change the overall rate plan, right? I really pumped up the summer. Maybe I need to bring that down a little bit. I think maybe the base rate's a little too high or too low. You can make those changes, but sometimes it's also like, I need to go talk to the owner about their minimums because their minimums are higher than the market. I need to go talk about this minimum length of stay restrictions that they put on because it's underperforming and all my properties that don't have that are performing really well. Another good one is sometimes you just need to look at your distribution. You're looking at the rate plan. It's in line with last year. The rest of the market's doing okay. This unit just stopped performing. Maybe it's, I need to go check if my distribution is actually working well, if I have good reviews, if the listing is even visible. And so there is kind of like a code red checklist that you can go through. And if you build that out for the most likely candidates that something might be underperforming, you just on a weekly or monthly basis go through your bottom performing listings. It's really important because as you optimize this, it allows you to give that really specific and holistic attention to listings, but it's not creating a process where you either have to rush through it or you're spending time on listings that don't need it. So you're able to give that attention, but also segment it down to the listings that need it most. Something else to keep in mind is I call this bottom up because I think that the lowest hanging fruit and best place to start that people want to start with is listings that are underperforming. But a lot of people will also do this on their top performing listings. They're obviously not looking for problems, but they're looking for opportunities. And that's another great use case of the same process where you're like, I'm going to look at my top 10 performing listings and see if I can push the rate, if I can expand the occupancy even more. Because sometimes it's easier to generate more revenue from a really successful property than it is to generate any revenue from a really poor performing property. Okay, cool. Any questions about that? Sweet. So these are just some examples. I won't go through this too much. I just have, an example of basically a document where I have a bunch of KPIs and I'm sorting my listings according to these KPIs. I think I would generally use occupancy. I tend to prefer occupancy as a method of identifying things because it's a little bit more equalized across listings. However, like I said, you can use RevPAR or revenue. You just have to be really cognizant that you're not comparing listings that have really different starting positions. And the goal here is just sort your listings, come up with a list, right? You can try different things too. Maybe your main one is I'm going to do occupancy for the last year and just pick my lowest occupied properties over the last year. But sometimes you may want to reserve like one or two of the ones you're going to look at to the stuff that's just had low sales in the last month, right? Because that might indicate maybe they have a history of performing, but something has changed. So you can try different criteria to kind of generate that list. Oh, why didn't that move? Then once you actually start doing the analysis on the listings, there's a few things you want to look at, and I'm just going to give you a few ways to kind of compare and check. The first one I would always recommend checking is your current rate plan against your historical ADRs. I see lots of people who look at listings that aren't performing and they're like, I don't understand why it's not performing. And we pull up their listing and it's like, well, you are trying to capture a rate that's like 30% what you ever, like 30% higher than what you did last year. Is that reasonable? Right? So that's a really good one to start is your rate in line with your historicals? If it's not in line with your historicals, do you have a good reason for that? Sometimes people do have great reasons. It was like, hey, it was a new property last year. I really think it should do better. Or, the owner had it offline for 3 months because we were renovating it. Those are all reasonable, but it's an opportunity for you to check if you have a reason for it. And it also is an easy place to change. If you are pushing really high above your historicals, you can easily try to just bring that down without cutting your projected revenue and see if that works. Another one is, do your demand periods align with the demand that you're seeing in the market? So if you overlay data like market occupancy, or you're using a rate tool that is telling you that certain dates should be higher than others, Does your either minimum structure or any of your overrides align with that? Are you basically disagreeing in a way that doesn't seem to be working out? That's a great way for you to kind of audit things that you've been doing. We know that as you're doing revenue management, we come up with solutions, they get put into the system, and then you kind of forget about them and move on and come up with solutions to other things. Sometimes you just need to audit the things you've been doing and kind of reset it back to a general point. Another thing that's useful to look at is if you're looking at the reservations from your historicals, really checking into the booking windows of those reservations, right? Are you making reservations at the same time? I see a lot of people who get worried because they're concerned about other parts of the portfolio. And so they kind of expand that concern, which is a reasonable thing to do. But then when we actually look at their data, it's like, well, hey, this listing really didn't start booking till later. So you probably have a little bit more time. So checking when those reservations were coming in your historicals. An alternate to that is I always recommend that people check if all of their reservations are coming in the last minute in their historicals. If that's the case, the second thing to check would be, do they keep their rates really high and then cut them? Because the answer is generally maybe don't start with your rate so high because you're always selling in the short term, and the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. So there's a lot of little things here. This one I think is one where we can probably come up with a pretty comprehensive list, and you can see I provide some examples on the right of this slide, but your goal is just to go through your list of things that you can check to see if you can improve the performance. Any questions here? Anything in Escapia that you think might be helpful, or like some reports you guys would want to point out that can help people kind of deep dive or diagnose into listing or booking performance?
I do. So I mean, you've hit the nail on the head here with this, John. Our tools will allow you to do layering and sorting and filtering and the kind of data exporting that you need to get into these kind of deep dives. We do occupancy rates, we do ADR. You can sort and filter based on performance and find some of those bottom performing units so that you can optimize for your deep dives. And like you said, you can find some of your top performing units too. Maybe there is advantages that you can go for.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Go ahead, Matt. Were you going to say
I
something?
was going to say you can also go ahead and group up units too. So if you have certain units that you want to look together and run those metrics together on, you can do that inside of Escapia as well.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up, as well as when I'm doing these deep dives, it's why it's helpful to know like your lowest performers and your high performers, because sometimes I will just compare them to the high performers that are similar and be like, what is different here? Like, if I have a 2-bedroom high performer and a 2-bedroom low performer, and I put their rate plans over the top of each other, and my low performer is 30% higher in rate, that right there tells me something immediately that I might be able to change. Um, and whether you're using Escapia tools or doing this in Wheelhouse, or honestly, a lot of revenue managers probably do it both. You have a lot of data accessible to you in this kind of era of revenue management, and it's really great. The other thing too I wanted to just drill on is we talked a little bit about how to do this, and you're probably thinking like, well, I do this occasionally. The core piece here is to make it a process, because it's really easy to do a lot of these things scattershot and not do them consistently. And if you're doing them scattershot, it's really easy to get led down tangents. That's like, a synonym for revenue management should be tangent, right? So if you have a process where I've scheduled this time, I'm going to look for these specific things, and I'm going to do it consistently, that's going to be really beneficial, because most of these processes that are advanced, bottoms up, and pacing analysis, there's an element of what you looked at last week and what you looked at last month, you'll remember. And so you really get a lot of continuity in how you're approaching things, and it allows you to really develop a sense of an intuition on how things are going and what things work. And that continuity is going to be a huge really asset that you can leverage. A lot of revenue managers are like, well, I looked at the same thing every week and I've seen this happen, so this is what I think is going to happen. If you're just kind of looking randomly, it can be helpful, but you do miss out on that kind of holistic perspective you develop by doing the same process at least on a regular basis, right? Okay, what do we got next? We're moving a little quick, but we got about 10 minutes left. I'm not going to go through this tab. but this is just some examples of how to calculate this manually. You can see that I actually wrote out some formulas you can use to map reservation data to a chart so that you can put reservation data over the top of a rate plan. Now, if you're using Wheelhouse, we will do this for you. So if you'd like to talk about access to that, we'd love to chat. But I know not everyone is using that stuff. And awesome. Also, if you're training a revenue manager, it's great to make them do it the hard way first. It'll make them a much better revenue manager. So you can use this slide to experiment building out some visualizations on your own from the data you're exporting in Escapia or from Wheelhouse. So quick recap here, just of these kind of processes and when you would do them. On a daily basis, new booking analysis and maybe pacing analysis, particularly if you have a bigger profile or a bigger portfolio. The key with pacing analysis is you can look at your entire portfolio, but you do tend to segment down into smaller groups. You're like, I want to look at my one bedrooms in a specific market. So if you have 5 markets, you're going to look at 5 different visualizations and treat them individually. So if you have a really big or really varied portfolio, you might do pacing analysis every day, but be hitting different groups of listings, right? Like I do all my 1 bedrooms on Monday across every market, and then I do all my 2 bedrooms, and then I spend a whole day on Nashville, that kind of thing. On a weekly basis, you want to do that expiring inventory. Again, a reminder, go in, cut the rates. Don't spend a lot of time fiddling with the rates because you're going to do a lot more good for yourself spending that time on a pacing analysis than you are trying to decide if the rate should be $99 or $106. Again, pacing analysis, generally you want to get through your entire portfolio on a weekly basis. Some people will try to get through their portfolio twice a week on a 4 day interval, right? That's really relevant if you're doing like a really high production market, like an urban environment, or have a lot of like condos that book really short term. This one we didn't go over, but having a revenue meeting, I think is really important. If you have a revenue team, that's really an internal meeting where you're talking about the strategies that your different revenue managers might be doing in their portfolios. If you don't have a revenue team or separately you have a bunch of stakeholders, it's an opportunity for you to share the bigger picture with what's going on with your C-suite or with your owners teams, your operations teams, so that people are on the same page. I'm sure a lot of people get questions like, I don't know why the rate is this way, or I don't know what RM is doing. This is your opportunity to show them like, hey, this is where we're pacing behind, so we're cutting the rate. These dates are doing really well. That's why the rate might seem really high when you pull a quote up on the phone for a guest. Great thing to do on a weekly basis. And if you're using these tools or you're doing these processes, they tie directly in. Those pacing analysis visualizations are the core of what you're going to be sharing in a revenue meeting. The bottoms up is the things that you're going to be asking for help for with your marketing and distribution teams. Like, hey, these are the properties that I can't get to work by just adjusting the rates, right? So they do tie together. And then on a weekly basis, this one's maybe weekly, maybe monthly, but schedule some time to do bottoms up. I see some people do like small amounts of bottoms up on a weekly basis. Like every week I do like 3 or 4 properties. Some people like to do more of a like, hey, I'm going to do a post-mortem on the month. I'm going to go through the whole portfolio and do my bottoms up and my top down analysis and just kind of audit everything. So that's kind of up to you, but the goal is to just schedule it. On the right here, we have a schedule. And these are some things that we also didn't talk about, but as you can, there are a lot of other processes you can start to add in. What big one is on a daily basis, every time you make changes, like keep a note of them and follow up on them, right? I always recommend to people when you first start doing revenue management, every time you make big changes, go put a Google Calendar invite on your calendar telling you to look into it again in 3 or 4 days. If you're using Wheelhouse, you can actually set those reminders in the system for you to tell you, but it's very easy to forget about stuff. So just like go throw it on your Google Calendar. Different kinds of revenue meetings, you might have multiple over time because you have different goals. Like reporting to execs is going to look different than coordinating your marketing. And you really, maybe at first you just have the one meeting where you kind of cover everything, but over time you can really segment down. As you get really good and you have these processes established, I recommend actively doing a post-mortem and doing this on a monthly level. So at the end of every month, go through and analyze your performance, decide what you did well, decide where your opportunities were, track what events or what groups came in, and put them in a journal. Just keep a running Google Doc where you write all those notes down, because I swear, if you hire someone else onto your team, it's going to be a godsend. And the amount of times I've pulled up a journal like that and been like, what was I thinking last year? Super helpful. If you get really good, keep that journal going like as you're actually doing your revenue management. And it just is a resource for you and the company to give context into the historical data. On a quarterly basis, doing like strategy stuff. So really pulling back and not getting stuck in the weeds, but talking about what do you think the market is doing? How do you think it's going? And how do you guys want to approach it is going to be really helpful. And then obviously on an annual basis, budgeting, but I don't want to talk about budgeting. It's like, I'm very traumatized from it. Okay, perfect. That's me.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and get through because I know we have two really good questions that I think you might want to answer, John. But I want to thank you for covering all these strategies, and I can't wait to hear now and for those who are listening to this later, what you can see for success from some of these revenue strategies. As a reminder, Escapia's got a full suite of features and tools that can help you grow your business through these. Escapia stands out from the crowd. We offer battle-tested, industry-setting trust accounting. We've got highly acclaimed customer support. We have a simple pricing structure that you can plan for, and Verbo-focused tools and benefits like optimization sessions and rates data based on real-time first-party Verbo data that can help you grow. This is in addition to all of the things in reporting and rates management that can help you go through some of these winning strategies. I thought I'd note we've seen a lot of success with people who joined Escapia lately. Property managers who switched up from another property management software to Escapia have seen an average increase of 23% of booking value on Verbo. One property manager even saw a 115% increase thanks to the tools, and you may see more with some of the strategies that you can use today. If you're interested in learning more about how Escapia can help empower your business, please reach out to our team and we'll be more than happy to talk with you and help you. Now, John, I know you've got two questions, so I want to go ahead and offer the first one to you. Daniel Sewell says, how do we know if rates look right if our benchmark is, say, the prior year, but demand may be different this year, or if we change something about a listing that makes it more or less desirable?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you probably won't like my revenue management answer, which is these things are very relative. And because of that, what I would suggest doing is you have to pick baselines, and you may not agree with the baseline or have other decisions, but I always recommend start with your historicals as a baseline, because you at least you understand them. You're really close to it. So if you're looking at it and you're like, hey, you know, how does my rate compare to the historical? You can at least be very intentional. Well, it's higher, but I think it should be higher because we renovated it. It at least gives you a pathway for the decision you're going to make. As you get more advanced, or maybe you don't have good historical data, you can also substitute that with market data. When you talk to professional revenue managers, they actually use both and they will compare to both. So they're like, well, what am I doing compared to my historicals? What am I doing compared to my market or my neighborhood, and then they will decide based on those differences or discrepancies what they want to do. That's the key on the revenue management, is ultimately you are the decider. You're trying to just be able to have a good case for why you're making that decision. And so rates are never really like right or wrong. There's not a like platonic ideal of the rate plan for your thing that we're trying to get to. The market is changing, and so I would think about it more like you're betting. It's you have a risk tolerance, and you're deciding if decisions or ideas or gambles or things you're going to do are within your risk tolerance. And hopefully that framework, helps guide you. Like if you're really hung up on like getting it right, you might get paralyzed from making a decision. Just remember it's iterative. And the goal here is like decide how much risk you're willing to take, and just make questions. Like over time you'll learn more about how you think things are going to go.
Excellent answer. And there's one more question. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the Escapia teams or the Wheelhouse teams. We're more than happy to chat with you about these. So from our very own Daniel Bridges, what's your general approach to minimum stay rules when you're doing a nightly rate analysis or occupancy checks?
So generally speaking, when I'm doing like these kind of like occupancy or rate analysis things, I focus first on the rate. But you want to consider the minimum length of stay because, and actually, I think this is really going to depend on your product type and the market you're in, but it is a minimum length of stay is an option. So if you can change it, and you're looking at an opportunity, let's say an easy opportunity would be you're pacing behind on given dates. You might decide, well, I don't really want to cut the rate, so maybe I'll try cutting the minimum length of stay. So I'd really just see minimum length of stay as an option in the tool belt, right? You can go and look at market data. I often, will just talk to people. Like if you have revenue management friends in the industry or other people and ask them like, hey, are you seeing shorter bookings? Or your longer bookings doing well? But definitely just consider it as an option. I kind of do it intuitively. Like when I'm looking at stuff and I see opportunities and I'm looking at the rate, I will often just think like, well, do I want to do that or do I want to do the minimum length of stay? Especially, I'll make that decision if I'm already at a rate that's like below my historicals or really close and I don't want to cut. I'll be like, well, maybe I need to drop the minimum length of stay. I also think that adjusting minimum length of stay earlier than you have in the past is a response to changing things is a great option before you try to give up the rate. Now, where I do tend to be a little bit more heavy-handed is in the short window. If inventory is going to expire, you just don't have the time to be like, well, I'll change the minimum length of stay by 1 day and wait a week or two. It's like sometimes you just have to make bigger changes, but that's kind of the goal of shifting off of expiring inventory as your main revenue management to a longer term pacing analysis is you can make those little tweaks. And something else I would recommend is think about your portfolio is a laboratory with a lot of tests going on. You don't have to do everything portfolio wide. You can try stuff on a group of listings, and then you'll learn from that and decide if you want to do that during other time periods or as a broader kind of strategy. Awesome. Well, really appreciate you guys' time today. Hope this was helpful. We'll get the recordings out and make the presentation available to you. It's been my pleasure chatting. If you liked what you saw or you want to talk to some more of the revenue managers on the Wheelhouse team, please reach out to us. We're super able to pull up your own data and look at it together, and we have a really knowledgeable team and would love to help you with your revenue.
Same goes for us over here at Escapia. If you're interested in some of the tools or features, the new reporting abilities that we have, especially the recently expanded Flex reporting tools, feel free to visit us online, see what else we can offer for your business, how we might be able to help your units grow, and reach out to our team.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.